Ahmaud Arbery, affectionately known as Ahmaud or Quez by those close to him, was a 25-year-old African-American man from Brunswick, Georgia. A former high school football star, Ahmaud was celebrated for his athleticism and dedication on the field. Beyond sports, he was recognized for his generous spirit and the close bonds he maintained with his family and friends. Running was more than just exercise for Ahmaud. It was a passion and a way to clear his mind. He often jogged through his neighborhood, a routine that brought him peace and a sense of freedom. It was February 23, 2020, in Brunswick, Georgia, a small, quiet town that would soon be forever known for a crime that would shake the very foundation of this country. Ahmaud Arbery, a 25-year-old black man, was out for a jog in the Satilla Shores neighborhood, just like he did on any other day. But on this day, something was different. Ahmaud didn't know it yet, but his life was about to be ripped away from him in a way that defied all reason. Travis McMichael, a 34-year-old white man, had armed himself that day, and so had his father, Gregory McMichael, a former Glynn County police officer. Why? What could have possibly justified what they were about to do? The simple truth is, nothing. They had no evidence, no proof, no right to take the law into their own hands. But they did it anyway. They armed themselves, hopped into their truck, and set off with one sole purpose: to hunt down Ahmaud Arbery. The McMichaels didn't see Ahmaud as a man. They didn't see a son, a brother, a friend, a person with a life to live. They saw a threat. And in their eyes, this threat had to be stopped by any means necessary. Why? Because they thought he was involved in local burglaries. No facts, no evidence, just baseless suspicion and the kind of racial bias that has plagued this country for centuries. What compels a father and son to take such extreme action? What kind of twisted sense of justice can drive someone to believe that chasing down a man for the crime of simply being black is the right thing to do? This wasn't a case of self-defense. This wasn't a case of stopping a criminal. This was a manhunt. And the question has to be asked: how far can someone go before we call it what it is? Modern-day lynching? But it doesn't stop there. Gregory and Travis weren't the only ones in this sickening pursuit. William "Roddy" Bryan, a neighbor, joined in. He wasn't content to just watch. No, he took it a step further. Bryan, in his vehicle, positioned himself behind Ahmaud, chasing him as he ran, desperately trying to escape. But here's where things get even more twisted. Bryan didn't stop there. He pulled out his phone and started recording. Why? Why would anyone record such a thing? Was he just a bystander, helpless to intervene? Or was he complicit, feeding into this horrific chain of events? The footage he captured would later be the key to bringing the truth to light. But it didn't stop the madness. No, what Bryan recorded wasn't a simple jogger being harassed. It was a man being hunted down, his very existence reduced to a crime in the eyes of the McMichaels. And as the chase continued, Ahmaud Arbery didn't know what was coming. He didn't know that he was about to fight for his life in a battle that would cost him everything. But that's exactly what happened. The confrontation, which took place on a narrow, sun-dappled street in Satilla Shores, was brutal. Ahmaud, cornered by the McMichaels in their truck, tried to defend himself. As he fought for his life, Travis McMichael, with a gun in hand, pulled the trigger. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. 3 shots rang out in the Georgia air. 3 shots that tore into Ahmaud's body, ripping through his flesh and leaving him to fall to the pavement. Why? Why did he have to die? For what? Because he was black? Because he was running? Because the McMichaels decided that his life didn't matter? As Ahmaud Arbery lay there, dying on the cold ground, Gregory McMichael's chilling words to the police would forever echo in the minds of those who heard them. When they arrived on the scene, the father casually remarked that his son had shot Ahmaud in self-defense. Self-defense? Self-defense against a man who was running? Gregory's attempt to justify the killing, to frame it as a necessary act of defense, is a stark reminder of the dangerous power of twisted logic. This wasn't self-defense. This wasn't even a crime in the traditional sense. This was murder, plain and simple. But the most maddening part? The excuse that they used, the citizen's arrest defense. They claimed they were acting under the premise of detaining Ahmaud because they suspected him of being a burglar. But ask yourself, Was this truly an arrest? Was this how an arrest is supposed to happen? Is it really arresting someone when you chase them down in a truck, shoot them, and leave them to die in the street? Was this justice? Or was this modern-day lynching? This excuse, this so-called citizen's arrest, was not just a legal loophole. It was an attempt to normalize and legitimize the idea that anyone, no matter how dangerous or unfounded their actions, could take the law into their own hands. It was a perversion of justice, a crime hidden behind the guise of authority. And to make matters worse, even in death, Ahmaud Arbery was still being accused of things he never did. Even as his body lay there, lifeless, he was still being blamed for a crime he never committed. What is it that drives people to do this? What makes someone feel that it's okay to dehumanize another person so completely, to strip them of their dignity and their rights? Is this a failure of the justice system? Is this a product of a society that refuses to confront its racial biases? Or is this something deeper, something more insidious at work? And here's the most chilling question. What if it wasn't Ahmaud Arbery? What if it was you? What if it was your son, your daughter, your friend? Would the McMichaels have cared? Would they have taken the law into their own hands in the same way? This crime, this brutal killing, has become a symbol of everything wrong with a society that continues to turn a blind eye to racism and injustice. But it doesn't stop here. It didn't end with Ahmaud's death. No, this is just the beginning. This was just the moment when the world woke up to what had happened. The real question is, what are we going to do about it? How do we stop this from happening again? And how do we hold people accountable for their actions when justice is delayed, when laws are manipulated, and when people believe they can kill without consequence? The events of February 23, 2020, in Satilla Shores, Georgia, were a moment of terror for Ahmaud Arbery. But they were also a moment of reckoning for America. And as we move forward, we need to ask ourselves, will this be the last time something like this happens? Or will we continue to live in a world where lives are taken based on nothing but fear, hatred, and a false sense of justice? In the days following Ahmaud Arbery's murder, the darkest forces of the justice system attempted to bury the truth, hiding the horror in plain sight. This chapter is one of betrayal, by law enforcement, by those in power, and by the very system that's meant to protect the innocent. In the small town of Brunswick, Georgia, a disturbing reality began to surface, one that would take the courage of a stranger and the power of technology to unravel. But let's rewind a bit, because this story doesn't end with Ahmaud's murder. No, it was only the beginning. Imagine this. A father and son, Travis and Gregory McMichael, are free, having killed a young man in broad daylight, in cold blood. They did not flee the scene. They didn't even run away, fearing consequences. No, they walked away like they were the ones who had been wronged. But why? Because in their minds, they had done nothing wrong. They believed they had done what was right. And with that in mind, they thought they could erase the crime that had just occurred. They had the power, they thought, to bury it. The first line of defense? Local law enforcement. A police force that would soon find itself under a harsh spotlight. They took the McMichaels story at face value. No questions asked. It was a citizen's arrest. Ahmaud was just an intruder. No need for further investigation. Imagine that. Brian wasn't just a bystander. He was there, filming. He captured the final moments of Ahmaud Arbery's life. But here's the irony that cuts to the core. Brian wasn't recording the murder because he was looking to expose it. No, he filmed it thinking it would help the McMichaels case, thinking that the video would back up their twisted version of events. He was complicit in their plan to bury the truth. But what he didn't know was that the very video he believed would help them would become the weapon that exposed the ugly truth to the world. This is where the story takes a dramatic turn. The video, which initially went unnoticed, eventually leaked. Someone, somewhere, felt the weight of what had been done and decided that silence was no longer an option. The video surfaced online, and with it, a wave of outrage. A wave so strong, it couldn't be ignored. The video didn't lie. It didn't play into the story the McMichaels had tried to sell. It showed the truth. It showed Ahmaud Arbery, unarmed, trying to defend himself. It showed the McMichaels hunting him down like an animal. And most of all, it showed a horrific reality. This wasn't just a crime. This was modern-day lynching. Can you imagine the rage? The disbelief? The heartbreak of watching a young man's life stolen so callously? The very people who were supposed to protect him, the local law enforcement, did nothing. Absolutely nothing. For weeks, the truth was hidden. But when that video leaked, the floodgates opened, and the world could no longer look away. But the question remains, why did it take so long for anyone to act? Why was justice delayed for Ahmaud? Why did it take the leak of a disturbing video to bring attention to this case? Was the justice system really that broken? Or was there something more sinister at play? And what does it say about a community, a country, that allowed this to go on for so long? The video changed everything. Public outrage erupted. Social media exploded with anger. The hashtags #JusticeForAhmaud and #BlackLivesMatter surged again, pushing this case to the forefront. But the McMichaels, and the system that had protected them, still didn't understand what had just happened. They underestimated the power of truth. They underestimated the power of the people. And now, they had to face the consequences. As you sit here reading, ask yourself, how many more Ahmaud Arbery's are there? How many more people have suffered in silence because of a broken system that was too blind to see the truth? How long will we continue to allow these senseless acts to occur with no justice? The fight for Ahmaud Arbery has only just begun, but the question remains, will we allow history to repeat itself? If you felt the weight of Ahmaud Arbery's story and believe in the fight for justice, don't let this moment fade into the background. The fight for racial equality, real change, and accountability is far from over, and your voice matters. If you want to stay informed, join this community as we uncover the truth behind the stories that shape our world. Hit that subscribe button, because together, we can ensure that stories like Ahmaud's never go unheard again. Don't just watch, be part of the change. The trial of Travis and Gregory McMichael, alongside William Roddy Bryan, was more than just a legal proceeding. It became a stage where two opposing narratives clashed, one based on truth, the other rooted in prejudice and distortion. The courtroom became a battleground, not just for justice for Ahmaud Arbery, but for the very heart of what it means to live in America. The stakes were high. A man had been murdered. A family had been torn apart. A community had been shaken to its core. And the world was watching. As the trial began, the defense had a strategy: demonize Ahmaud Arbery. They wanted to turn him from a victim of a brutal killing into a villain who deserved what happened to him. But there was one glaring problem. Their entire case was based on lies, half-truths, and a blatant disregard for reality. How do you demonize a man who was simply out for a jog? How do you paint a young man as a criminal when there is no evidence to support such claims? The defense team's attempt to paint Ahmaud as a criminal was not just offensive, it was calculated. They dredged up anything they could find. An open garage door, a fleeting moment of him looking around a construction site, but there was no proof that he had done anything wrong. The defense tried to make these minor, irrelevant moments seem like the actions of a dangerous man, as if Ahmaud Arbery's crime was his mere presence in a neighborhood, running down a street in the small town of Brunswick, Georgia. Is that what we're calling criminal behavior now? Going for a jog in an area you've lived near? A community that should have embraced him instead treated him like an outsider. Why? Because of his race? The defense even tried to use Ahmaud's past, a past that had nothing to do with the day he was killed, to make him seem like a threat. But there was no evidence that Ahmaud had ever committed any crime that would warrant his execution in broad daylight. In fact, the only thing he was guilty of was being black in a place that didn't welcome him. That was it. Nothing more. As the trial went on, one of the most disturbing aspects of the entire ordeal was the demeanor of the men who had taken Ahmaud's life. Travis and Gregory McMichael, father and son, sat side by side in that courtroom. They had been accused of murder, but if you looked at them, you wouldn't see the remorse you'd expect from men who had just taken a life. No, their faces were cold. Their eyes were steady, almost defiant. The silence from them spoke volumes. They didn't seem sorry. They didn't seem like men who had lost control of a situation. Instead, they seemed like men who were convinced they were in the right. They felt no guilt for ending a life, for taking someone's son, someone's brother. Could it be that they truly believed their actions were justified? And if they did, what does that say about the world they lived in? Then came the prosecutor's closing argument. It was a turning point, a moment that will be remembered as a shining example of how a skilled, passionate advocate can tear apart a defense built on lies. The prosecutor stood before the jury and made it clear that what had happened that day wasn't self-defense. It wasn't a case of a father and son protecting their community. No, it was a case of two white men hunting down a black man, stalking him in their truck, cutting him off, and gunning him down in cold blood. The prosecutor demanded that the jury not fall for the lies. He urged them to reject the narrative that Ahmaud Arbery had brought this upon himself. With those words, the entire courtroom seemed to pause. The air thickened with tension. For the first time, it felt like the truth was going to have its day. For the first time, it felt like justice might be served. But even as the jury deliberated, the question lingered in the air. Could we really expect justice in a case like this? Could we expect a jury to deliver a guilty verdict when everything about the system seemed to be rigged against the truth? Would the McMichaels and Bryan be convicted? Or would they walk free, just as so many others had before them? The verdict came down like a hammer. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable. It was a moment of silence, long, drawn out, filled with anxiety and anticipation. When the jury announced its decision, there was a collective breath held across the nation. Guilty. Guilty on all counts. The McMichaels and Bryan were found guilty of murdering Ahmaud Arbery. A sigh of relief, yes, but also a flood of emotions, anger, grief, disbelief, that a young man had to die before his killers were brought to justice. But that wasn't the end of the story, was it? The questions didn't stop there. The court case was over, but the bigger questions remained. Was this truly justice? Or was this just a small victory in a much larger battle? Would the justice system continue to fail Black Americans? Or would this verdict mark a turning point? Let's be honest. This trial, this verdict, wasn't just about the McMichaels and Bryan. It was about something much larger. It was about the systemic racism that runs deep in this country. It was about a community where someone like Ahmaud Arbery couldn't even go for a jog without being harassed, chased, and murdered. It was about the fact that for too long, this kind of violence had been ignored, dismissed, or swept under the rug. And here we are, watching a court case unfold, wondering, what is the true price of justice? Is it enough to simply convict those responsible? Or do we need a deeper change in the system itself? How much longer will we accept a world where race determines who lives and who dies? Let's not forget, Ahmaud Arbery was killed because of the color of his skin. In 2020, in the United States of America, a man couldn't even go for a run without being hunted like prey. Why? Because the color of his skin painted him as an enemy. That's a hard truth to swallow, but it's the truth we need to confront. So, I leave you with this. Can we ever truly have justice for Ahmaud Arbery when the system that allowed this to happen is still standing? Can we justice has been served when we never? The verdict may have been guilty, but the war for racial justice, for equality, for humanity, is far from won. If you found this story powerful, make sure to subscribe for more in-depth investigations and true crime stories. Stay informed, stay engaged, and don't miss out on future content. Hit that subscribe button now. As the dust began to settle in Glynn County, Georgia, and the nation watched in anticipation, the question that lingered in the air was a haunting one. Was justice truly served in the case of Ahmaud Arbery, or was this just another fleeting moment of accountability, a small victory in a war that felt never-ending? Ahmaud's murder had ignited protests, sparked outrage, and forced America to confront its deeply rooted racial issues. The conviction of the McMichaels and William "Roddy" Bryan on charges of hate crime wasn't just a win for the Arbery family, it was a statement to the world. But did it truly signal a shift in America's justice system? The trial, one that was riddled with controversy, gave rise to the conversation that people had been avoiding for far too long. What happens when the justice system fails, and when a young black man is senselessly hunted down for nothing more than the color of his skin? And why did it take so long for justice to arrive for Ahmaud? The hate crime conviction handed down to Travis and Gregory McMichael and their accomplice Bryan sent shockwaves through the country. For many, it was a rare moment where the scales of justice actually tilted in favor of the victim, where the law saw through the twisted narrative the defense had tried to weave about Ahmaud being a suspect without any evidence. But was this truly justice, or just a momentary flash of accountability that would soon fade into the abyss of forgotten cases? This was a rare conviction in a case that had, for months, looked like another instance where the justice system might fail, yet again, to uphold fairness for Black Americans. The brutal truth was undeniable. A father and son had chased down a man on a quiet street, confronting him as he was minding his business, and then shot him dead. The chilling indifference they displayed, as if this was just another day in their world, sparked a flurry of emotional responses. People were angry, disgusted, heartbroken. Ahmaud's family, his mother, Wanda Cooper Jones, was left to pick up the shattered pieces of her life, knowing that nothing would ever bring her son back. But for the nation, the bitter aftertaste lingered. Was this a turning point for racial justice in America? Was the justice system finally waking up, or had it just been another case of too little, too late? In the months that followed the trial, many began to wonder if this case would be remembered as a symbol of real change, or simply a reminder that, no matter how much progress is made, racial disparities are still deeply entrenched. Did the conviction of the McMichaels and Bryan actually lead to real systemic change? Or was this just another moment where people were allowed to feel a temporary sense of justice, only for the cycle to repeat itself in the future? And then came the questions that would haunt anyone watching closely. Was this just a lesson? A lesson for the world on how not to treat Black men in America? Or was it a stark reminder that, unless the culture of racism and bias in America is eradicated, we'll continue to see innocent lives lost to senseless violence? For many, the verdict brought a sense of relief. But it was also a bitter reminder of the lives that had been lost, of the victims who never received their day in court. And that, perhaps, was the most tragic part of the entire ordeal. How many other Ahmaud Arbery's would have to endure similar injustices before things truly began to change? The long-term impact of this case wasn't just about what happened in that courtroom in Georgia. It was about what kind of world we were leaving for future generations. Would they face the same struggles? Would they be forced to relive this same nightmare? Despite the conviction, the sobering reality is that things have not changed overnight. The fight for racial equality in America is far from over. And for Ahmaud Arbery's mother, the pain of losing her son was a wound that could never fully heal, no matter what verdict was delivered. The question that lingers, unanswered, is, what happens now? Can we truly prevent the next Ahmaud Arbery? Or are we doomed to repeat the same tragic cycle again and again? So, as we reflect on the legacy of Ahmaud Arbery, we're left with questions, raw and painful. What lessons will we learn from his death? Can the justice system be trusted, or do we need to keep fighting for real change? Is this just one chapter in a long history of injustice, or is it the beginning of something greater? The silence is deafening. The truth is still out there, somewhere, and we're left wondering, what does it really take to end this kind of violence? As Ahmaud's story fades into history, the world continues to ask, how many more lives will be lost before we wake up to the reality of racial injustice? Will we learn, or will we fail again?